right, ladies and gentlemen, week one of the 2024 NFL season is kicking off Thursday night between the Ravens and the Chiefs, which means week one of the 2024 fantasy football season is officially underway. And here at the Catch, we will be doing everything we can week in and week out to help you guys bring home a victory each week throughout the season and hopefully a championship trophy at the end of the year for your respective fantasy football leagues. So that means here heading into week one, we are going to go through every single matchup and go game by game, talking about every single quarterback and tight end. Who should you be starting? Who should stay on your bench? And who's just kind of as we head into week one of 2024 fantasy football. So if you guys are new to the channel, this is all we do here all year long, free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. If you're into that, be sure to subscribe on the way in, and please drop a comment down below if you guys have any fantasy football questions, any format, any position, trades, waivers, whatever it may be. Drop them down below. I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Let's not waste any more time. Let's hop right into today's video. The good news is if you own any of the quarterbacks on the screen, then you are good to go. These are your must-start quarterbacks for week one, whether it's due to matchup or because they are just absolute studs who you spent too high of a draft pick on to not start in week one. Whatever it may be, I mean, this is quarterbacks is pretty straightforward. So here are your must-starts: Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, CJ Stroud, Kyler Murray, Anthony Richardson, Joe Burrow, and Jordan Love. And here are your must-start tight ends. Nothing to worry about if you own these tight ends. You are still rolling with them without a doubt into week one. Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce, Trey McBride, Dalton Kincaid, Mark Andrews, George Kittle, Evan Ingram, Kyle Pitts, and even against that stingy Browns defense, we are still considering Jake Ferguson a must-start tight end in week one. All right, so Thursday night, week one's kickoff between the Ravens and the Chiefs. A pretty easy evaluation here for both the quarterback and the tight end position. You've got four players, two at each position, that were on the must-start list we just went over. I mean, I know we got two defenses that are pretty good here involved when we look at the Ravens, when we look at the Chiefs, but we also have two really good offenses involved here and two absolute stud quarterbacks who both made it to the AFC Championship last year as well. So yes, you're starting Lamar Jackson in all formats. You're starting Patrick Mahomes in all formats. You're starting Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce in all formats. If you have Isaiah Likely on your roster, maybe you're in a deeper format, larger league, whatever it may be, maybe Dynasty, you're considering him. I do likely, no pun intended, as a player to have, some relevant weeks this year potentially. But here in week one, let's not find out. Isaiah Likely definitely on the bench as we approach the coming week. We're moving into Friday night's action, first ever Friday night game for week one NFL year. And we're going to have the Packers and the Eagles facing off, two teams that also have good offenses, good defenses. It's going to be another exciting match here. And a pretty easy evaluation, I would say, as well. We're still starting J-Lo. I think he's going to be actually a pretty good fantasy start here in week one. Like I said at the beginning of the video, he is a must start for me. This Eagles defense was not good last year. Their secondary was not good. Maybe they have improved in the offseason. Wouldn't put it past them, but I think I am still expecting a lot of points in this game. So I am A-okay with Jordan Love in your starting lineups. And I think you drafted Jordan Love to be your starter anyway. So he's a starter here. Then staying with the Packers here, I think Luke Musgrave is an start for me. Like maybe in a 12-team format or deeper, you might have ended up with Luke Musgrave as your starting tight end if you punted the position. Maybe you have him on your roster and you have another late-round guy like a Pat Freiermuth or Cole Kmet. I think Musgrave's just kind of an start. I think the volume here is going to be interesting to see. I do think he could have a good season this year, but I just don't want to risk anything here in week one. Not a player that I'm going to consider a must start, and really only a player that you should start if you absolutely don't have a better choice. And at that point, you're crossing your fingers for a touchdown. Tucker Kraft, I don't know if he's going to be ready to play here in week one, but if you do have him, maybe in a deeper format, dynasty something, we're not starting Tucker Kraft in week one. No reason to do so. He may not even play. Then when we look at the Eagles, Jalen Hurts, absolute no-brain, must start player. Week in, week out, doesn't matter what team he is going up against. Dallas Goedert, I will consider a start going into week one. I do think if you drafted Dallas Goedert, especially in 12-team plus formats, you drafted him to be your starting tight end. So I don't see any reason to sit Dallas Goedert in week one. Once again, I think we're going to see points out of both offenses between the Packers and the Eagles here in week one. Probably don't have a better option than Dallas Goedert on your roster anyway, so he should be starting. I may not have the most upside here in week one. Really going to be interesting to see how Goedert fares out this year with the new offensive coordinator and everything coming back from injury, but I think Goedert will be okay. Not my favorite start, but he's still a starter heading into week one. All right, moving on to Sunday's action. We have the Arthur Smith Bowl. We're going to have Russell Wilson facing off against Kirk Chains. And I do think this is an interesting matchup. Like if you're in a super flex format, double quarterback, deep league, whatever, you own Russell Wilson. I kind of toyed with the idea of putting Russell Wilson in the category, but the more I've thought about this matchup as the week has gone on, I think the Falcons defense is going to have a good day at home on Sunday. So most formats, most fantasy managers, you're not going to need to start Russell Wilson. I think he's a sit for me. But if you are in a deep enough league, that's a league where you're starting two quarterbacks, maybe you could consider him. But ultimately, I think he belongs in the sit category here in week one. Then Pat Freiermuth is a start. If you have to start him, sure, you can. He is the second receiving option on this team. If we're not including Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren out of the backfield, he's the next best option behind George Pickens. But we're just going to have to kind of sit back and see what the volume looks like, what this new offense looks like, all that stuff. So Freiermuth, kind of like similar to some of the tight ends we just went over. Like if you have to start him, it's okay. You probably don't have anything better. You probably punted the position. So if you need to, I guess you can. I'm just not overly excited about it here in week one, although I'm hoping Freiermuth has a better season than last year in which he was injured for most of. Moving on to the Falcons. Yes, I do think Kirk Cousins is a start here in week one. Probably a quarterback that you either have rostered because you punted the position or you're in like a super flex double QB situation and you're looking at potentially starting him. And I do think you can start Kirk Cousins in week one. I believe in this Falcons offense. The offensive coordinator going to be more similar to what we saw out of a Rams style offense. No more Arthur Smith. He's now with the Steelers. So I like this start a lot. I know some people look at the Steelers defense and get a little bit scared, but don't forget that secondary was not great last year. I don't really expect this to be a super high scoring game, but I do expect Kirk Cousins, this Falcons offense, to come out kind of swinging, and I do think he has a pretty safe floor. Maybe not the craziest ceiling, but I'm okay with Kirk Cousins as a start this week, even in single quarterback leagues. Then Kyle Pitts, I had on the must-start category. Some people might disagree with that. The Steelers were not bad against opposing tight ends last year by any stretch, but hey, if you drafted Kyle Pitts, you drafted him to be your starter. So, I doubt you really have better options on the bench. Maybe you have a guy of a lower caliber, like a Pat Freiermuth, but you're not going to put that player in over Kyle Pitts. This is the year. He has a real quarterback. Let's keep the faith. Kyle Pitts is a must start. Moving in to week one. All right, next up, we will have the Cardinals traveling to Buffalo to face the Bills, and this is a pretty straightforward game here for the Cardinals. Yes, we're starting Kyler Murray and Trey McBride. You've drafted both these guys to be your starters, way too high of draft capital to not start either Kyler or Trey McBride. But I have seen some teams where maybe like you drafted Kyler even in a single quarterback format, and you still got a guy like Purdy or Tua, Trevor Lawrence, someone like that later. And maybe you're kind of looking at the Bills defense, you're kind of nervous here because that Bills defense was solid last year, but it's very different on paper going into 2024 in comparison to what it was last year. I'm not worried about the Bills defense whatsoever. I expect points in this game, and I actually expect the Cardinals to push back somewhat in this game. I think some people are going into week one thinking the Bills are going to blow out the Cardinals, and This Cardinals defense is bad. Don't get me wrong. I expect the Bills to have themselves a day offensively, but I do expect Kyler Murray and company to come out and score some offensive points. So I really like Kyler this week. I really like Trey McBride. They are both must starts for me. Looking at the Bills, yes, same situation. Josh Allen's going to be a must start. Dalton Kincaid's going to be a must start. No doubt about it. Both of those guys are in your starting lineups. Basically, for all the reasons that I just listed for Kyler Murray and Trey McBride, we're also going to have both Allen and Kincaid in our starting lineups. If Dawson Knox on your roster for some reason, maybe in a deeper format, larger league, maybe you're holding out faith that he's going to take a higher snap share away from Kincaid, or maybe you're just hoping Kincaid gets injured. I don't know, but no reason to start Dawson Knox as we head into week 1. All right, moving along to the Titans at the Bears. This is kind of an interesting matchup here, especially when we look at the tight end position. But let's just go ahead and start with the Titans on the road, going up against a Bears defense that I think is going to be a little stout on Sunday, and I think it's going to be pretty stout throughout the season as well. So I'm going to go ahead and say sit Will Levis. I know some of you guys out there in double quarterback, super flex formats, maybe you drafted Will Levis because you believe in his sophomore breakout type season. And I'm not totally against that. I've talked up the Titans throughout the offseason to have that potential, for Will Levis to have that potential. But I think in week 1, you're probably not really in a situation where you are going to be forced to start Will Levis. So I don't think you need to go out of your way to start Will Levis, even in deeper formats or double quarterback formats. I think for the most part here on the road, week 1, let's go ahead and sit Will Levis. And in single quarterback formats, definitely sit him. And then when we look at the tight ends here, Chicken-Conquo and Josh Weil, early in the offseason, I liked Chicken-Conquo as kind of like a deep sleeper at the position. And then Josh Weil kind of got into the mix, and now we're seeing like shared snaps here. There's just nothing here in terms of fantasy heading into week 1. Maybe something emerges, but we're not going to risk it in starting lineups, even in deep formats. So both the Titans tight ends are going to be sits for me. Moving over to the Bears, I'll go ahead and say Caleb Williams is okay to start. I know he looked great in the preseason. That was not up against a real, NFL defense. And I'm not discrediting Caleb Williams by any means. I still like him this season. And the Titans defense, not necessarily great either. So I think this is, he's in a good position. He's at home. He's got all these different weapons, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, this is still a rookie quarterback. So I don't know if the ceiling is incredibly high, but I think if you drafted Caleb Williams, maybe you have another quarterback who will come up later on the list, like a Tua or Brock Purdy as well. I don't know. I mean, we see a lot of different rosters out there, so you might have someone who you think you should or could start over Caleb Williams. But I think for the most part, if you drafted him, you probably want to start him. So just go ahead and roll with him. I do think this is a good opportunity week 1 at home. I think those fans are going to be going crazy. Like I said, all those different weapons. Roma Dunze, I think, can have a sneaky good game, but he's still got Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, DeAndre Swift at running back, which all are great weapons. But that brings us to the tight end position, where we got Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett. So, like I said, I like Chicken-Conquo early in the offseason. Then Josh Weil started to get into the mix. And I liked Cole Kmet a lot early in the offseason as well, as he's finished as a top 8 fantasy tight end 2 seasons in a row. Always had good chemistry with Justin Fields. We even saw a little chemistry between Caleb Williams and Cole Kmet in the preseason. But then we have to look at the fact that Gerald Everett was kind of brought over to the Bears from his former team with the Bears' new offensive coordinator. And then Gerald Everett's gotten into the mix and has been stealing snaps and all of that. So I just want to sit both Bears tight ends. And I do think Cole Kmet is probably on a lot of rosters right now as kind of a late round or late round tight end. If you punted the position, he may have ended up on your roster. And I don't think you need to drop Cole Kmet or freak out here, but let's just kind of see, in this brand new Bears offense, how the snap share kind of works out, what the volume looks like. I think if you were to start any of the tight ends on the screen right now, you are absolutely crossing your fingers for a touchdown. The volume's too tricky here. Don't start any of the Titans or Bears tight ends as we move into week 1. Moving along, we've got the game of the week, the Brisket Bowl. Jacoby Brissett is going to be the QB1 for the Patriots. We won't be seeing Drake May make his rookie debut in week 1. And I don't think for any reason in any format we're starting Jacoby Brissett on the road against the Bengals in week 1. Okay. Bengals defense, not great last year. terms of points allowed, fantasy, most positions, but I can't imagine a format. And I mean, you'd have to be in a 20-man league super flex, I think, to even be considering Jacoby Brissett. Moving along, Hunter Henry, I know, has been kind of like a flashy name, deep sleeper name throughout the offseason. And I don't know, maybe you punted the position, you own Hunter Henry. I just don't feel good about Hunter Henry. I think he was um, wildly disappointing last year. Maybe he has good chemistry with Jacoby Brissett, but honestly, even if you're a Hunter Henry believer, would you honestly feel good about Hunter Henry being in your starting lineup? Unless once again you're just in a super deep weird format. No, we don't want to start any Patriots offensive player, probably outside of Ramondre Stevenson, heading into week 1. So Brissett, Henry, both sit. Then moving over to the Bengals, Joe Burrow, a must start, no doubt, brainer right here. I think he's going to have a big day. I know the Patriots defense still okay last year. Not necessarily saying they're going to be completely awful, but I think here in week 1, the Bengals going to have themselves a day. Joe Burrow is going to be slinging the football. Maybe Jamar Chase isn't going to play. We'll find out. He's got enough weapons, even if Chase does not play. And at least against this caliber of defense and being at home and everything, Burrow will be fine in week 1. And I think Joe Burrow is going to have such a good day, regardless of if Chase plays or not, that I would head straight to Underdog Fantasy. His line for passing touchdowns is at 1.5. I would take the over. I think he easily comes out of this matchup with 2 passing touchdowns. If you are new to Underdog Fantasy, use promo code The Catch. That link is down below. Take that Joe Burrow passing touchdowns over. Then you will also get a free pick'em for week 1. That is going to be Travis Kelce over half of a total yard. Take your Burrow line, your Kelce line, 3x your money right away. Not to mention that new customers also get a 50% deposit match on Underdog Fantasy up to $1,000. So up to $1,000 in bonus cash you can use on any pick'em you want. Here's the one I would pick, plus that free Travis Kelce pick'em. Earn some extra cash as we approach week 1. Mike Gesicki, kind of another tight end who throughout the offseason maybe was like a deep sleeper guy, but you'd have to be in a really deep league to consider Mike Gesicki this week. So I don't think you need to start him for any reason. Let's see if that chemistry that was reported between him and Burrow is there in the regular season. We'll find out, but let's not find out in our fantasy lineups as we approach week 1. All right, next up, we got the Texans at the Colts. This is going to be a good matchup, I think. It's going to be a very relevant matchup for fantasy football. CJ Stroud, a no doubt must start throughout the season. It just doesn't really matter. You drafted CJ Stroud to be your starting quarterback throughout the season. So it doesn't matter what defense he's going up against. He's got so many weapons, should flourish in his sophomore season. We're starting Stroud. Dalton Schultz, I think, is for me. You probably drafted him because you punted the position. Maybe he's like a depth piece if you drafted a more volatile or injury-prone guy like Pitts or Kittle. I do like Dalton Schultz this year, but I didn't go out and draft Dalton Schultz if I did necessarily to have a ceiling. I mean, you got Diggs there, you got Nico, you got Dell, you got Joe Mixon's going to get red zone touches. Like, there's a lot of weapons here. Schultz is going to have weeks, but he's going to be volatile because there's a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. I do like him. I think the floor is okay with Schultz. If you're forced to start him, it's fine, but I don't necessarily prefer to in week 1. Then when we look over to the Colts, Anthony Richardson, another must-start quarterback, week in, week out, as long as he's healthy. We are starting A-Rich. The ceiling is way too high. He's at home here in week 1. That's good. We like that. I think it's going to be a great matchup once again, so I'm all for Richardson. Kylan Granson's the starting tight end for the Colts. I mean, they always seem to be like rostering 12 tight ends, and none of them are fantasy relevant. There was buzz early in the offseason about Jonnu Smith before he got placed on season-ending IR. Was not in on Jonnu Smith. I'm not in on Kylan Granson. I hope someone emerges that's fantasy relevant on the Colts roster, but heading into week 1, there's no reason you should be starting Granson. Except we have the Jaguars at the Dolphins, and this is one of the matchups that I have starred for this week. Some people a little bit lower on this matchup, lower on the quarterbacks in this matchup, but man, I love this matchup for fantasy heading into week 1. Both of these secondaries struggled last year. I know the Dolphins had some moments, but those moments they had defensively last year, even they had a nice streak towards the end of the season, but that was against bad offenses. And some people right now have like a sour taste in their mouth about the Jaguars. I mean, Christian Kirk was out the second half of the season. Trevor Lawrence was basically playing hurt all of last year. He had like 4 injuries last year. Trevor Lawrence is fully healthy. Christian Kirk's good to go. This offense in a much better position this year. Got Brian Thomas Jr. as a wide receiver too. No, Calvin Ridley's gone, but I think B. Tom can come in and fill that role right away. Got Gabe Davis, will be interesting to see. Evan Ingram still a stud. Got a great backfield led by Travis Etienne. So I think this is a fun matchup. I think these offenses are both going to show what they're capable of on Sunday. So, Trevor Lawrence in the start category for me, especially in like double quarterback super flex formats. But if you punted QB in a single quarterback format and T-Law is your starting quarterback and you're nervous, probably has like a lower projection on your fantasy site than most other starting quarterbacks. He's probably sitting at like 17 points, right? Don't be too nervous here. I think T-Law is going to have a solid week 1. Maybe the ceiling's not crazy, but I think he'll be fine in week 1. Look good in the preseason. T-Law for me is a start moving into week 1. And then looking at Evan Ingram, he's basically going to be a must-start tight end for me week in and week out. Way undervalued last year, way undervalued this season before. No love for Evan Ingram in most drafts. And if you do love him, you did respect him, you were still walking away with Evan Ingram in like the 7th, 8th round of your fantasy draft, which is insane because he's been a top 5 tight end 2 years in a row. So Ingram, start him no matter what. Then looking over to the Dolphins, Tua time. I think Tua's a start. I've seen, some people a little bit lower once again on Trevor Lawrence and or Tua in this matchup. And I think Tua for fantasy, another great option who maybe you punted quarterback and he's your guy. And once again, you're looking at your lineup and he's only like projected 18 points or whatever. I think these quarterbacks are both going to be on full display on Sunday. And Tua, just don't forget, while the touchdowns weren't super high last year, the passing yards were. Another quarterback who looked great in the preseason, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, 2 studs at wide receiver, great running backs. We know Devon Achane can catch the football out of the backfield as well. They're at home. This is going to be a good day for Tua. I'm not worried about it. And I actually like Tua so much that I would head over to Underdog Fantasy and I would take the over on his passing touchdowns set at 1.5. I can easily see Tua coming out of this game with 2 total passing touchdowns. So go ahead and smash the higher on that line. Then if you are a new customer, go ahead and use promo code TheCatch. That link is down below on the screen as well, and you are going to be gifted a free pick'em for week 1, and that is Travis Kelce over half of a total yard. Pair that free pick'em that you can claim with promo code TheCatch with Tua over 1.5 passing touchdowns. Will automatically triple the money that you enter. Not to mention that promo code TheCatch is also going to get you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 on Underdog Fantasy. So up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Go ahead and use that towards Tua over 1.5 passing touchdowns and your free new customer, Travis Kelce, over half a yard pick'em. Earn some cash. Let's get back to the quarterbacks and tight ends. And then that brings us to the tight end position. Jonnu Smith. Well, maybe something flourishes throughout the season for Jonnu Smith in this offense. I certainly hope so, but I don't want to find out in week 1. Even in deeper formats, I don't want to start Jonnu Smith. He should be a sit as we move in to week 1. Next up, we've got the Panthers at the Saints. And this is the first team, I think, where the offense is all set. So Bryce Young, Tommy Tremble, Jatavion Sanders, all sets. Listen, I think the Panthers offense will improve this year. I think Bryce Young will improve this year with Dave Canales as his head coach. But I don't think this is a good matchup whatsoever on the road in week 1, going to New Orleans against a good Saints defense. Nothing that I like here. You might have Bryce Young as like a QB3 in a super flex format. You don't have any reason to start him. Maybe own him in Dynasty still. Stay away from Bryce Young this week. And I don't want to start any Panthers tight ends anytime soon. So Tremble, Sanders, both sits. Looking at these Saints, Derek Carr, I considered close to an start, maybe in super flex, double QB formats. If you're forced to start Carr, I guess you could. But believe it or not, this Panthers defense was not that kind last year to opposing quarterbacks and even opposing wide receivers. They just didn't really need to do a whole lot because their offense wasn't doing anything. So I don't know, but um, I just don't really feel great about Carr. Like I like Olave, I like Rashid Shaheed, I still like Kamara. Like he's got the weapons, but come on, is anyone really fully confident in rolling out Derek Carr? You have better options. You probably don't need to. If you're forced to, double quarterback superflex, okay, but I still don't think the ceiling's very high here, especially with I don't believe the Panthers going to have a great offensive day, but we'll find out. Taysom Hill comes in as an eh. If you're in a bad position at tight end, you punted the position, you don't like what you have, whatever it may be, you're in a deeper format, you have to roll Taysom Hill. I think the first most important thing is, depends on what app you play on or what site you play on, because if Taysom Hill's listed as a tight end, that is beneficial because if he does get those snaps near the goal line, like as a fullback, running back, or if he gets quarterback snaps, then you get to just take advantage of that. If he's listed as a quarterback, then no, the ceiling's not high enough, way too volatile. Even in Superflex, I don't like Taysom Hill in a quarterback spot, but if you're in a rough spot and he's on the waiver maybe, and you want to throw him in at tight end, I think it's okay, mainly because this Panthers defense a little bit volatile. So I think Taysom Hill, okay for the week, but don't go out of your way to start him. Jawan Johnson for me is just a sit. He, has been kind of injured throughout the offseason, had moments last year. It was a streaming option, but for me, week one, no reason to need to start Jawan Johnson, even in deeper formats. All right, the most anticipated game behind the Patriots and Bengals this week will be the battle of Sam Darnold and Danny Dimes. And this is the first matchup, I believe, where everyone is just a sit. So even in super flex leagues, double quarterback leagues, there's no reason to be reaching to start Sam Darnold or Daniel Jones. Maybe you have one of them on the bench in those type of formats. They're still starting quarterbacks. That's fine. But, I will say, Vikings secondary, not great. Giants secondary, not great last year. So maybe we get a little bit surprised here. And you always seem to have those kind of very low caliber quarterbacks have those weeks in fantasy where you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, Ryan Fitzpatrick had 28 points or whatever, right? And, maybe Sam Darnold or Daniel Jones has a Ryan Fitzpatrick type performance in this matchup. I'm all for it, but do I want to find out and risk it in my fantasy lineup? No, especially not in a single quarterback format. So no reason you really need to start Sam Darnold or Daniel Jones. I hope that they have good games and this isn't an offensive mess, but we're going to sit back and see what happens. Don't get me wrong, Darnold has some weapons here, and maybe that comes to something, but I do think another factor here is that the Giants run defense really bad last year. So I think that maybe they'll run on or depend on Aaron Jones a little bit here. Won't be surprised if JJ and or Addison have decent days, but man, I don't know why I'm still talking about this. Just said Sam Darnold. Josh Oliver is listed as the starting tight end for the Vikings right now. No interest whatsoever. These guys don't need to be in your starting lineup moving into week one. And then just quickly looking at the Giants, no, you don't need to start Daniel Jones. The only person considering starting Daniel Jones is the Giants fan in your league who just is doing it because Daniel Jones still exists for the Giants. Looked awful in the preseason. They're at home. Just no reason to start Daniel Jones. I don't know why I'm still continuing to talk about all these players, but Daniel Bellinger, Theo Johnson, no reason to start any Giants tight ends. This was a little rough to get through there, and this feels sad just looking at the screen, but let's just move along. No Vikings, no Giants as we approach week one. All right, that brings us to another kind of sad matchup for me in terms of quarterbacks and tight ends. That's the Raiders at the Chargers in week one. So we got Noodle Arm, Gardner Minshew Mania. Listen, I am all for a good backup quarterback story, and Gardner Minshew I would absolutely love to spend a day with, but in my fantasy lineup as my starting quarterback, no, thank you. Even in double quarterback super flex leagues, no thank you, okay? Neither of these defenses, once again, similar to the matchup we just went over with the Giants and Vikings, neither of these defenses necessarily really scare me. The Raiders were actually pretty good in terms of fantasy scoring last year in terms of their defense, and Chargers had a couple moments against bad offenses, including the Raiders, but maybe something happens for Gardner Minshew here, but I think Zamir White, if anything, will have a good day. There's still weapons: Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers. Brock Bowers is on the screen, but come on, we're not starting Gardner Minshew. Michael Mayer, no reason to start him because he's going to have those snaps taken away from Brock Bowers, who comes in as a for me. I think if you drafted Brock Bowers, you probably drafted a second tight end. If you didn't, and Bowers is your best option, you can start him here. I want to see how this volume works out. We still saw like double tight end formations in the preseason with Mayer and Bowers. I think Bowers could be frustrating at times this year, but he's also so talented. And we did see the Raiders at times line him up in a lot of creative ways. So I'm okay with starting Bowers. I'm not going to go out of my way to do so, but he's an okay start for sure moving into week 1. Then when we look at the Chargers, this might surprise you, but I got Justin Herbert as a sit. I think most people would probably at least have him as an kind of like fringe type quarterback start, or like someone okay in double quarterback super flex leagues. And that's about where I have Herbert right now. If you own him in those type of formats, I'm okay with him. But I really went back and forth here. And for the most part, Herbert's a sit for me because he's coming off of the foot injury. And, he's not going to be super mobile in this game. And then we know this is a run first offense now with new head coach Jim Harbaugh. And I just want to see how things kind of shape out here. We're kind of uncertain about the wide receiver room. Palmer, Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnston. We don't have any talent really at tight end, as you can see on the screen. Got the Gus Bus as the RB1 there, but is J.K. Dobbins going to be involved? Is Vidal going to be involved? Like, there's just too many questions here that I don't feel good about Herbert in week 1. If you're forced to start him, so be it. If you're in a double quarterback super flex type format, he's okay as a QB2, but I think for the most part, I just don't really want to start Herbert in week 1. I'm not super excited about this matchup for him, so I'd rather just sit back and see what happens. I don't think he has a high ceiling moving into week 1. And then looking at the tight ends for the Chargers, Hayden Hurst, Will Dissly, nothing there for us in fantasy. No reason to start either of these guys, even in deeper formats. All right, that brings us to the battle of Bo Nix and Geno Smith between the Broncos and the Seahawks. And, Bo Nix, impressive preseason, looked good. This is a real NFL defense. The Seahawks, they're going to be a much stronger defense this season. And I think at home, I'm going to pass on Bo Nix, even in Superflex double QB formats. I think if you drafted him in those type of formats, he's probably at least your QB3 anyway. So let's sit back and see if we're still Bo leavers after about 6 weeks in the NFL. Not discrediting him. I hope he has a great rookie season, but come on, we don't want to find out in our starting lineups in week 1. Greg Dulcich, one of those names, always seems to pop up as we're in the offseason, but just bear in mind, go back and look at what Greg Dulcich did statistically last year. He was basically as good as playing 0 snaps. Now, I know he was hurt, but at the same time, it's like, don't get cute here. Don't throw Greg Dulcich in your starting lineup. There's just nothing here for this Broncos offense outside of Cortland Sutton and Javonte Williams as we move into week 1. Then in terms of the Seahawks, maybe in a super flex double QB type format, you could start Geno Smith. Maybe you drafted him to start him. I think that's okay. I think it's a good matchup. The Broncos defense really poor last year. I think they could be better this year, but I just don't really see a major amount of upside for Geno Smith, okay? New coaching staff here, new offensive coordinator. Don't get me wrong. We could see some, impressive things here. You still got Metcalf, Lockett, JSN. Still got Walker, Noah Fant, who we'll talk about in a second. There's maybe enough here to start Geno Smith, but I just don't feel great about it in week 1. Geno, before he got hurt last year, looked really rough, did not look like the Geno Smith we got the previous season. So I just don't think you need to go out of your way to start Geno Smith. If you absolutely have to in a double quarterback super flex format, okay, that's fine with me, but that's about it. Noah Fant, I know he's been a kind of a hype name throughout the preseason, offseason, everything, but once again, I'm just not really there. Noah Fant, he never really seems to bring that fantasy ceiling that we always expect from him. So for me, this matchup, while I do, I won't be surprised if we get some pleasant surprises in this game from maybe Geno Smith or Bo Nix, but come on, I don't want to find out in week 1. I've got everyone as a sit in this matchup as we approach the week. All right, next up, we've got the Cowboys traveling to Cleveland to face the Browns. And you may have noticed Dak Prescott did not make the must start list at the beginning of the video. But yes, we're still starting Dak Prescott. It's a tough matchup here on the road against the Browns defense. So that's why I didn't put him in the must start category. But I mean, come on. If you drafted Dak Prescott, you were starting him week in and week out. And let's give Dak a little bit of love. Like, I don't really know why, but Dak has gotten like so much hate this offseason. But he was the QB3 in fantasy football last year. He was lighting up teams. It's going to be a tougher schedule this year. Don't get me wrong. And yes, maybe he deserves some of the criticism for, performances in the playoffs. But this is fantasy football, baby. All we care about is weeks 1 through 17. So Prescott, even on the road against a tough defense, I'm still going to start him in week 1. And you drafted him to be your starter. And just don't forget, top 3 quarterback in fantasy last year. Have some faith in Prescott, even against a tough Browns defense. And then Jake Ferguson, I kind of debated not putting him in the must-start category just because, once again, it's the Browns defense here. And you might be asking yourself, looking at this matchup, like, should I start Ferguson? And the answer is yes. I mean, the volume's going to be great for Jake Ferguson. He's one of the most targeted tight ends in all of football last year in the red zone. And Dak Prescott, Dallas Cowboys offense are going to need Jake Ferguson in the red zone this year. If you drafted Ferguson, you drafted him as your starter. Roll with him in week 1. I still really like him as we approach the week. Then moving over to the Browns, I think you could go ahead and sit Deshaun Watson, double quarterbacks, super flex. Sure, you could throw Watson in. That's about it for me. But I think in single quarterback formats, there's no reason to start Deshaun Watson. We didn't really see anything last year that was super inspiring out of Watson. And, Cowboys defense kind of volatile last year, but ultimately still a good defense. They're on the road here. I just don't see a high upside for Watson, so we'll keep him limited. Super flex, double quarterback type leagues, deep leagues, dynasty, all that stuff. But single quarterback, majority of you guys out there, we're sitting Deshaun Watson. David Njoku came really close to making the must-start list, but I left him off just to leave another player off. Don't want to put every single player on that list, but I still really like Njoku going into week 1. Not the greatest matchup here against the Cowboys, but he's at home. I think Deshaun Watson's going to lean on him a bit. So I think, once again, you drafted Njoku to be your starter. Show some faith. Keep in mind, a lot of those high ceiling games last year out of Njoku came with Joe Flacco, a quarterback, and not Watson or the other bunch of quarterbacks that played for the Browns last year. But I still think Njoku way too talented to not kind of be a vocal point of this offense and get a lot of targets that will make him valuable throughout the week and as well as valuable throughout the entire season. So we'll start Njoku easily in week 1. Next up on the list, we'll have the Commanders facing off against the Buccaneers. And interesting matchup here. I do expect points in this game. We have pretty volatile defenses, volatile bad secondaries in this game. So I like both quarterbacks in this game. But let's start with Jaden Daniels, who just has a lot of upside, similar to when I talked about Caleb Williams, right? Like, if you drafted Jaden Daniels, you believe in him, you probably want to roll him out in week 1, and I am okay with that. A little bit of risk involved here. It's still a rookie quarterback in his first start on the road, but the rushing upside is going to be there. We know Jaden Daniels can still throw the football very well. Doesn't necessarily have a ton of great targets, but he at least has a great wide receiver 1 and a good run game between Brian Robinson Jr. as well as Austin Eckler. So I like Jaden Daniels this week, and I think if you drafted him, you're probably going to roll with him anyways. But maybe you drafted like a Trevor Lawrence, a Tua, Matthew Stafford behind him, and you're wondering, maybe consider benching him. But for the most part, I think we're rolling out Jaden Daniels. Upside is way too high. Then looking at the Commanders' tight ends, we got Zach Ertz and Ben Sinnott. I think both will have moments throughout the season. And we saw in the preseason that both Ertz and Sinnott were involved. So we'll just kind of sit back and see what happens here. Maybe someone emerges that's, consistent and fantasy relevant on a regular basis, but I don't want to find out in week 1. We'll just sit back and see what happens. Then moving over to the Buccaneers, I do think Baker Mayfield's an okay start this week. Superflex double quarterback is where I prefer him, but if you're in a really bad quarterback situation for some reason in a single quarterback format, or you're just in a deeper league like 16 teams plus, and you're forced to start Baker Mayfield, he's okay this week. Baker's still a top 10 quarterback in fantasy last season. This Washington defense is bad. Their secondary is still awful. I think Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, both going to have very good days. So that means that Baker should probably be okay. Maybe not the highest ceiling, but I'm still okay with Baker in week 1 if you're forced to start him. Cade Otton, always one of those names that, admittedly, I kind of like throughout the preseason. Kind of waiting for him to break out here. The touchdown upside is what he's missing. I just don't think there's enough to start him. Have to be in a really deep format to even consider it. So Cade Otton is a sit moving into week 1. It's Sunday Night Football, one of the best matchups of week 1. We've got the Rams traveling to face the Lions, and I do like Matthew Stafford in this matchup. I think some people might have him like in the category, a fringe start, or maybe limit him to QB2 super flex formats, but I like Matthew Stafford this week. I like this Rams offense a lot. I do think when we look at the Rams and the Lions, it might be depending on the run game first, but man, I think the Sean McVay offense still going to throw the football a ton. So I really like Matthew Stafford in this matchup. The Lions, theoretically improved that secondary throughout the draft this past year, but last year, this secondary was really bad. So I really like Matthew Stafford. We know Puka's healthy, Cooper Kupp's healthy. Even on the road, I think Matthew Stafford is a solid start in week 1. Colby Parkinson's going to be your starting tight end for the Rams right now. We'll see what happens here. But I don't think there's any reason to consider starting him in fantasy formats moving into week 1. Then looking at the Lions, once again, this team's going to, rely on the run first. We know Monty and Gibbs going to get a ton of touches, but Goff at home should be solid. I think he's definitely worth a start in week 1. I mean, we're kind of looking at 2 late round quarterbacks, and maybe you punted the position, and you're probably in that situation just going to start a guy like Stafford or Goff. I think that's fine. Goff has still been perfectly okay the past 2 seasons in fantasy. So if you have to start him, don't be afraid. Maybe you drafted a more volatile starting quarterback who maybe is injury prone or runs the football like Kyler, like Jaden Daniels, and you have a guy like Goff behind him and you're considering it. At that point, I think you take the upside with the rushing quarterback. But if you're just rolling into the season with Jared Goff as your starting quarterback, don't be too afraid. Maybe the ceiling's not crazy high, but he's a good start. And then Sam Laporta, week in, week out, is going to be a must-start tight end until further notice, unless we see some crazy type of change in his play or volume. But Sam Laporta, the tight end 1 in fantasy football last year, expect him to have a solid week 1. All right, last but not least, Monday Night Football. We have the Jets squaring off against the 49ers, and hopefully we're going to get an actual full game, full season out of Aaron Rodgers. So I've got him in the category. I think some people might put him in the sit category coming off of the major injury he suffered last year. Some people might have him as a start. And I think, I kind of went back and forth here, and I just kind of decided he's an for me. Double quarterback, super flex. Once again, if you have to, he's fine. He is. In single quarterback formats, I don't know that I love him, but I could see a situation where you punted quarterback and you're forced to start him. I think he's okay, but this is a tough matchup on the road. I mean, the Niners secondary, a little volatile last year at times, not their strong point. Their strong point is that front 7, which I do think could be a problem for Rodgers throughout this game. But I do, I can definitely see, Garrett Wilson catching a touchdown, Breece Hall getting a lot of work in this game, and the Jets offense still being okay in this game. So if you're forced to start Aaron Rodgers, I think he's fine, but I just don't think that ceiling is crazy high where he's in a position where he's considered a start this week. Tyler Conklin, let's sit back and see what happens. He's a sit for me this week, but I do think Conklin could emerge as one of the kind of top streaming tight ends as the season starts to progress here. Reportedly has good chemistry with Aaron Rodgers, is going to be involved in this offense. So don't really want to find out in week 1, but I do think Tyler Conklin, even if we're sitting him, let's keep a close eye. And then moving over to the Niners, Brock Purdy was kind of close to the territory here going up against the Jets, but I think ultimately if you drafted Purdy, you're probably rolling into the season with Purdy as your starting quarterback, unless, once again, he drafted like a volatile QB1 or Purdy just fell and he felt like he was too good at value. But I think for the most part, you own Purdy, you're probably starting him. If he was on the road here, maybe get closer to the category. But you guys know, if you have followed the channel, that I've always been a Purdy believer. Purdy was my most drafted quarterback going into last year. And let's not forget, Purdy was still a top 6 quarterback in fantasy football last year. Still a great offense. He's got all his weapons. He's got Ayuk there, Debo's there, Kittle's there, C-Mac's going to play in this game. Brock Purdy is still a start moving into week 1. Don't let the Jets defense scare you out of starting him. And then George Kittle, week in, week out, even if he's volatile, still a top tight end year in, year out. He's going to be a player that needs to be in your starting lineups. I mean, it's going to be frustrating at times. He might go 3 points, then 7 points, then 28 points, then 41 points, then 1 point, then 15 points. But hey, you drafted Kittle. You know what you're getting. He's still one of the best tight ends in the league, and he still needs to be in your starting lineup moving into week 1. And that'll do it for today's video. There's every single matchup, every quarterback, every tight end, everything that you guys need to know, start or sit, heading into week 1 of the 2024 fantasy football season. If you guys did enjoy the content today, be sure to hit that subscribe button on the way out. Come join the Catch Fam community. And please drop me a comment down below and let me know what quarterbacks, tight ends you guys are starting heading into week 1. But more importantly, any fantasy football questions you guys have, any format, starts, sits, trades, roster ads, roster drops, rate your team, or whatever it is, let me know. I'll get back to you guys as soon as I possibly can. With that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, saw it here on The Catch.